Ever wondered what happens when family betrays you? I discovered the shocking truth behind my family's business and how I turned betrayal into success. You won't believe the twist. Watch now. I never thought my life would lead me here. Standing in the lobby of Mountain Pine Lodge, a place that was once the pride of my family but now a crumbling relic in desperate need of saving. I'm Charlotte Charlie Bennett, 52 years old, and I've spent my entire career in the hotel industry. For 20 years I ran hotels in Chicago, honing my skills and building a solid reputation. But when my father called, the news of our family business's financial troubles hit hard. Without a second thought, I decided to leave my stable job and return to Colorado to save the family hotel. It wasn't just a sense of duty that brought me back. It was the promise of a legacy. This hotel, built by my grandparents in the 1970s, was meant to be the heart of our family's wealth. But over the years it had fallen apart. The hotel, once a symbol of success, had become a shadow of its former self. The financial situation was dire. This was my opportunity to fix what had gone wrong and rebuild what was broken. But there was something about coming back that left a bad taste in my mouth. It wasn't just the money or the hours of work ahead of me, it was the relationship with my brother, Ethan. Growing up, Ethan was always the carefree one, the one who skipped school to go surfing or spent his time on creative endeavors. He had all the potential in the world but could never stick with anything. His career path was like a wandering river, shifting from one thing to another, never landing in one place long enough to make a real difference. Meanwhile, I'd spent my life building a career in hospitality. From a front desk clerk to managing some of the most prominent hotels in Chicago, I'd worked hard for every promotion and every accolade. But whenever I came back home, it was like none of that mattered. "When are you coming back to the family business, Charlie?" was the only question I ever heard from my parents. And if I was ever recognized for my work in Chicago, it was always followed by, "That's great, dear, but you're still the one who will help us fix the hotel." And then there was Ethan. Ethan, who never really cared about the family business. Ethan, who would pop in and out of our lives, offering vague suggestions about modernizing the hotel, but never actually doing anything to help. But to my parents, Ethan was a genius. A creative mind who could transform the place with just a few ideas. It didn't matter that he had no experience in the industry. It didn't matter that he was constantly switching jobs. To them, Ethan was the one with vision. And I was the detail-oriented one, the one who got things done but wasn't visionary enough for their tastes. I still remember the first day I returned after all those years in Chicago. It wasn't a warm reunion. My father, David Bennett, sat at the dinner table staring at his coffee, not really looking at me. My mother, Linda Bennett, was all smiles, but I could tell they weren't really excited to see me. They were more concerned with Ethan's presence. "Charlie, you need to listen to Ethan more," my mother said. "He has wonderful ideas for the hotel." Wonderful ideas? I nearly choked on my wine. Ethan's ideas were as fleeting as his job history. I had spent months planning, researching, and working on a strategy to save the hotel, but to my parents, Ethan was the one with the answers. I had done the work. I had put in the hours, rebuilt the marketing strategies, improved guest satisfaction, and streamlined operations. Yet, every time I presented my ideas, it was always brushed aside. My mother would pat my hand, smile, and say, "Ethan sees the big picture, Charlie. You're too focused on the small stuff." The irony of it all was maddening. I had spent 20 years in one of the most demanding industries, managing multi-million-dollar properties, and here I was reduced to the detail person in my family's eyes. I understood the importance of the details. They were what made a hotel great. But to them, the big picture always trumped the nitty-gritty. Ethan would wander in and out, offering his occasional half-baked ideas, but my parents would treat him like a guru. I still remember the moment that broke me, the moment when Ethan suggested cutting our breakfast buffet to save money. I tried to explain to him that our breakfast service was one of the key factors that kept guests coming back, but he just laughed and said, "Sis, numbers aren't everything." Numbers weren't everything? Was he serious? I couldn't believe it. He was about to make a decision that could drive our repeat business down, and he didn't even care. I pushed back, showing him our guest satisfaction data, our booking trends, and how important the breakfast was to our guests' overall experience. But in the end, it didn't matter. Ethan was right. He was always right in their eyes. Ethan wasn't the only one who irked me. My parents didn't seem to see the damage that was happening. I'd spent months working tirelessly to turn this hotel around, but all they cared about was Ethan's latest idea. They saw him as the one with vision, and me as the one who just did the work. It was exhausting. I was tired of being invisible, tired of being underestimated, and above all, I was tired of my family's indifference to everything I had sacrificed. So when the call came, when my father told me that we were just weeks away from bankruptcy, it felt like a final wake-up call. This was it. If I didn't do something now, the hotel would be lost forever. And yet, when I looked at the family, I realized that I wasn't the one they saw as capable of leading this business. They wanted Ethan to be in charge, even though he didn't have the first clue about running a hotel. I knew what had to be done. I knew how to save Mountain Pine Lodge, but for once I wasn't sure if I was willing to do it for them. Not anymore. I spent the next several weeks buried in the work of rebuilding Mountain Pine Lodge. Every morning I arrived before sunrise, determined to restore this place to its former glory. I started with the basics, fixing the reservation system, and modernizing the guest rooms. I knew the hotel's outdated infrastructure needed a complete overhaul, and I was ready for the challenge. The decor had to be updated to reflect a more contemporary mountain lodge style, one that could attract the younger, more adventurous crowd. I was in charge of everything, from negotiating with suppliers to bringing in local artists for the artwork. I even reached out to travel bloggers and journalists, inviting them to experience the rejuvenated hotel. Slowly, the word got out, and the hotel began to regain some of its former reputation. The transformation was nothing short of incredible. What was once a place nobody wanted to visit became the talk of the town. Our booking numbers surged, and for the first time in years we were operating in the black. I could see it in the eyes of our returning guests. The appreciation, the excitement for what we had become. It wasn't just a hotel anymore, it was an experience. I had worked tirelessly to make it so. But, as expected, Ethan was nowhere to be found. He would come around occasionally, lingering in the lobby, offering unhelpful comments about how the new layout looked too trendy. When I showed him the booking numbers, he shrugged them off as though they didn't matter. "It's just temporary, Charlie. We need something more sustainable," he'd say. But it wasn't temporary, it was working, and it was time to move forward, not backward. Then the unthinkable happened. Ethan decided to make changes to our breakfast service, which had been one of the major selling points of the hotel. He felt that cutting costs on food could help increase profit margins. I couldn't believe it when he casually mentioned it. The breakfast service was one of the reasons our guests loved coming back. It was a signature part of the experience at Mountain Pine Lodge. Yet Ethan, without understanding its significance, decided to reduce the offerings to save a few bucks. I tried to reason with him, pointing out that the breakfast was an integral part of our guest satisfaction and a key element of our revenue. "You don't get it, Ethan," I told him firmly. "This is what keeps our customers coming back. It's not about cutting corners to save a few dollars. It's about giving people an experience they can't get anywhere else." But Ethan was stubborn. He dismissed my concerns and went ahead with the decision. His logic was simple. "Numbers aren't everything, Charlie. We need to think big. This hotel isn't just about breakfast." He didn't understand that it was about the details. The details were what made people remember the experience. It wasn't about grand sweeping changes, it was about perfecting what we had. The breakfast cuts were just the beginning. Ethan didn't stop there. He began making decisions that were based on pure speculation, things that had no grounding in the way hotels were actually run. One morning, I walked in to find that Ethan had fired Maria, our longtime head housekeeper. Maria had been with the hotel for over 15 years, keeping everything running smoothly. She had earned her place, yet Ethan let her go without a clear reason. When I asked him why, he said she wasn't flexible enough to adapt to his new vision. I was furious. Maria was one of the most loyal employees we had. She had worked for this family for years, and Ethan didn't even bother to consult me before making such a drastic decision. I managed to intervene and get her job back, but the damage had already been done. Maria left the office with tears in her eyes, humiliated. The trust that had once existed between the staff and management was now gone. How could Ethan not see that? That was the moment when I realized the extent of the chaos Ethan was bringing. Every decision he made seemed to stem from his limited understanding of how a hotel operates. His ideas weren't grounded in the reality of running a business. They were just whims, disconnected from the everyday workings of Mountain Pine Lodge. But what really hurt the most wasn't just Ethan's bad decisions. It was how my family continued to stand by him. Despite all the hard work I had done to save the hotel, despite the fact that I had single-handedly turned things around, my parents were still inclined to give Ethan more authority. They were in love with his ideas no matter how impractical or misguided they were. It became clear that they weren't just blind to my efforts, they were actively choosing to ignore them. One evening after an exhausting day, I sat down with my parents in the living room, hoping to discuss some of the progress we had made. I had expected to be congratulated at the very least. But instead they dropped a bombshell on me. "Charlie," my father said, not meeting my eyes, "we've decided it's time to appoint Ethan as CEO of Mountain Pine Lodge. He has the big vision we need to take this hotel into the future." I felt the blood rush to my face. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You're giving Ethan the CEO position?" I asked, my voice tight with disbelief. "After everything I've done? After everything I've sacrificed to save this hotel?" My mother, trying to soften the blow, added, "We think Ethan is the right person to lead us now. You've done great work, but it's time for a fresh perspective." A fresh perspective? Ethan didn't know the first thing about managing a hotel. He hadn't been there during the late nights spent with contractors, or when we were struggling to pull the hotel out of debt. He hadn't dealt with the supply chain issues or the staffing problems. Yet somehow he was the one they chose to lead us. It was as if all my hard work, my sleepless nights, and my commitment to the family business meant nothing. I felt invisible. I had poured my heart and soul into Mountain Pine Lodge, and yet my family still didn't see me as the one to lead them. Instead, they handed the reins to Ethan, someone who had barely contributed to the real work, someone who thought leadership meant making superficial changes without understanding the deeper needs of the business. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting to save a hotel. I was fighting to prove my worth, to prove that I was capable of being the leader I had always aspired to be. But it wasn't just about proving it to my family anymore. It was about proving it to myself. And now I had to decide if I would stay and continue to watch Ethan destroy everything I had worked for, or if I would take matters into my own hands and build something of my own. The days that followed Ethan's appointment as CEO felt like a weight was pressing down on me, suffocating me. I couldn't escape the feeling of being trapped in a family dynamic that dismissed everything I had worked for. Every step I took to improve Mountain Pine Lodge seemed to be undone by Ethan's reckless decisions, and no one seemed to care. My parents were blind to his mistakes, and I couldn't bear watching him destroy everything I had fought to build. One afternoon, after yet another frustrating meeting with Ethan about his latest misguided changes, I needed a break. I jumped into my car and drove aimlessly, trying to clear my mind. The crisp Colorado air outside the car window did little to ease the storm brewing inside me. As I drove down the winding roads, I found myself passing Riverside Lodge, a property that had once been Mountain Pine Lodge's main competitor. It had always been a beautiful building, perched perfectly with views of the mountains, but over the years it had fallen into disrepair. I slowed as I passed, noticing something that made my heart skip a beat. A for sale sign was planted in the front yard. My first instinct was to keep driving. I didn't need another distraction. But something about that sign stopped me. I pulled over to the side of the road and stared at it for a few moments. There it was, an opportunity. A new beginning. Riverside Lodge was in need of a complete overhaul, just like Mountain Pine Lodge had been when I first arrived. But this time I could build something on my own terms. No more fighting with my family, no more competing for validation. I could finally prove my worth, not to them but to myself. I took a deep breath and made a quick decision. I called the number on the sign and scheduled a viewing for the following day. The idea of starting over was both terrifying and exhilarating, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the right move. I had to do something for me. But as fate would have it, as I was heading home that evening, I received a letter in the mail. It was from a law firm, one I had never heard of before. I opened it with shaking hands and read through the legal jargon. My heart sank as I processed the contents of the letter. It was about Mountain Pine Lodge. Apparently, a portion of the hotel's shares had been put up for sale, and the letter informed me that I had the option to purchase them. My first thought was that it was a simple matter of business. But as I read on, I realized that this wasn't just about a financial transaction. It was about my family's decisions. The letter explained that the shares had been offered to an outside party, and I was being given the chance to match their offer. This meant that, despite my years of hard work, my family was prepared to give away part of the ownership to someone outside the family. A stranger. My stomach twisted as the reality set in. Why had they never mentioned this to me? Why was I not consulted before this decision was made? As much as I had always felt like an outsider in my own family, this felt like the final straw. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks. I had given everything to save that hotel, and now they were willing to sell part of it off to someone else. It became clear to me that my family wasn't just overlooking me. They were actively making decisions behind my back, disregarding everything I had done. This was more than just business, this was personal. I slammed the letter down onto the passenger seat and stared out the windshield. The drive back home felt like a blur. My mind raced with questions, anger, and disbelief. I knew I had to make a choice. A hard choice. I couldn't stay in a situation where my contributions meant nothing, where my family's business was being run by someone who didn't understand the first thing about hospitality. The next morning, I drove back to Riverside Lodge. The air was fresh, the mountain views were just as stunning as I remembered, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. I met with the realtor and took a tour of the property. It was in rough shape, but I could see the potential. I could see what it could become. This place had a soul, just like Mountain Pine Lodge had once had. And I could bring that soul back to life, without the weight of my family's expectations, without Ethan's interference. By the end of the day, I had made up my mind. I would buy Riverside Lodge. It was a risk, no doubt about it. I would have to put every penny I had into it, empty my savings and max out my credit, but for the first time in a long while I felt a sense of purpose. I wasn't doing this for anyone else. I was doing it for me, for my vision. The decision wasn't easy, and the next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, negotiations, and sleepless nights. I hired contractors to come in and evaluate what needed to be done. I began making plans for the renovation, everything from the layout of the rooms to the design of the new restaurant. But this time there were no distractions. There was no family to undermine my decisions. It was my hotel, my vision. As the renovation took shape, I began to feel the weight of the old Mountain Pine Lodge lift off my shoulders. The more I worked, the more I realized how much I had been holding on to that place out of obligation, not love. Riverside Lodge was my chance to create something new, something that reflected who I was and what I believed in. I decided to call it the Summit. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for, and the pinnacle I had finally reached, personally and professionally. Day by day the summit began to take shape, and with it so did I. I knew this was my new beginning, and for the first time in a long time I felt free. The moment we opened the doors to the summit, I knew this was different. It felt like a dream come true, the culmination of years of hard work, sleepless nights, and more risk than I had ever thought I would take. The building had been in disrepair, but I saw the potential. I had the vision. And slowly, as the renovations completed and the final touches were made, everything fell into place. The hotel was transformed. The grand opening was everything I had imagined it would be. Guests walked through the doors with excitement in their eyes. They marveled at the new design. A modern yet cozy mountain lodge aesthetic, with rooms that felt like a retreat, a haven for those looking to escape the daily grind. The luxury amenities, the attention to detail in every corner, the local artwork on the walls. It all made the summit feel like a place that had a soul. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my own destiny. What surprised me even more was how quickly word spread. Local press, bloggers, and influencers flocked to the summit, eager to see what the buzz was about. We had positive reviews within days of opening, and it didn't take long before guests from out of state started booking their stays. The attention was overwhelming at first, but in the best way possible. Our ratings skyrocketed, and more people chose to stay with us instead of the familiar Mountain Pine Lodge, the place I had spent my childhood in but now had left behind. The summit was everything I had dreamed of and more. But I couldn't escape the nagging thought of my family's hotel, the one that I had poured years into only to be overshadowed and ignored. Every time I saw a positive review of the summit or heard about the new guests checking in, a small part of me felt relief. I knew that this was the right choice. But there was also something else stirring inside me, guilt. My family, my parents, still hadn't come to terms with my departure. Ethan was still in charge at Mountain Pine Lodge, and I couldn't help but wonder what was happening over there. On the other hand, the decline of Mountain Pine Lodge was unmistakable. I started to hear whispers around town about how the place had gone downhill. Customers who had once been regulars at the lodge were now raving about the summit. I couldn't say I was entirely surprised. Ethan's lack of experience and misguided attempts to reinvent the place were proving disastrous. It wasn't just the low reviews that made me worried. It was the number of employees who had begun to leave. Longtime staff members, the ones who had been with Mountain Pine Lodge for years, started quitting. I heard that some of them had found jobs at the summit, and even though it made me feel a twinge of guilt, I knew deep down that they were leaving because they didn't believe in Ethan's leadership. They were tired of his chaotic management style, his lack of respect for the work that went into running a hotel. It wasn't just about the money, it was about stability, and Ethan wasn't offering that. The tipping point came when I overheard a conversation at the local coffee shop. A group of tourists who had just stayed at Mountain Pine Lodge were discussing their experience. One of them said, "I can't believe they're still open. The rooms were outdated, the service was awful, and the staff didn't seem to care. I'm never going back there." I couldn't help but wince. The place I had once loved was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Then came the final blow. Mountain Pine Lodge had slashed its rates. Ethan had resorted to desperate measures to keep the hotel afloat. Lowering prices meant attracting more guests, but it also meant compromising on the quality and reputation of the hotel. I could hear my parents in the back of my mind trying to justify it. "It's just temporary, Charlie. We're doing what we can to keep the business alive." But it wasn't just about surviving, it was about maintaining the standards that made the hotel great. Ethan was putting profits above everything else, ignoring the bigger picture just like he always had. The drop in quality and service was evident, and now even the loyal guests were starting to look elsewhere. They had once loved the charm of Mountain Pine Lodge, but it was now a shadow of its former self. It wasn't long before Ethan called me. He wanted to talk. I could hear the frustration in his voice, but there was also an undertone of something else. An acknowledgement that things were spiraling out of control. "Charlotte," he said, his voice strained, "I need your help. The hotel is in trouble. We're losing money, the reviews are terrible, and I don't know what else to do. I know you have experience in this, and I need you to come back and help me fix it." His words hit me hard. After everything that had happened, after all the bitterness and betrayal, I was being asked to come back and fix the mess Ethan had made. I couldn't believe it. "Ethan, you were the one who took over. You're the one who made these decisions," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I can't help you. You had your chance to lead this place and now it's falling apart. It's not my responsibility anymore." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Ethan sigh, a deep, defeated sound. "I know. I messed up, Charlie. But I don't know what else to do." His words lingered in my mind long after I hung up. He had failed and now he was asking for help. But I couldn't help him. Not anymore. I had made my choice and it was clear to me now more than ever. I wasn't going back. I had created the summit from the ground up and it was thriving. My success wasn't a result of fixing someone else's mistakes. It was because I believed in my own vision, my own way of doing things. And no matter how much Ethan needed help, I knew that I couldn't go back to a place that had never truly valued me. Mountain Pine Lodge was fading, and I couldn't be a part of it anymore. My focus was on the summit, on what I had built. And no matter how much the past tugged at my heart, I had to move forward. This was my new life, my new legacy. As the months went by, the summit continued to thrive. Our bookings soared, and the positive reviews kept flooding in, reaffirming that I had made the right decision. But despite my success, there was a lingering sense of unease whenever I thought about my family. No matter how many times I proved myself, no matter how much the summit grew, I couldn't shake the feeling that my family didn't truly see me for who I was. My parents, David and Linda, seemed to be in a constant state of denial. They had never fully embraced the idea of me striking out on my own. It was as though they had always expected me to return to Mountain Pine Lodge and take my place as the dutiful daughter, to clean up the mess Ethan had made. They couldn't comprehend why I wasn't willing to go back. "We're a family, Charlie," my mother would say. "You can't just leave Ethan to fail. You're the one who can fix this." But I was tired. Tired of fighting for their approval, tired of being told I wasn't enough, tired of being the one who always had to shoulder the burden of responsibility. I had spent my entire life trying to prove myself to them, but it had never been enough. Now that I had finally built something on my own, something that was truly mine, they still expected me to drop everything and fix their mistakes. Every conversation with them felt like a weight around my neck. My father, despite his age, would often call me, his voice full of frustration. "Charlotte, you have to help us. You know Mountain Pine Lodge can't survive with Ethan in charge. Please just come back. You don't have to be the CEO, but you could help him, guide him. We can't lose this place." It wasn't the first time they had asked me to come back, and each time it felt like a slap in the face. They weren't asking me to return out of respect for my skills or my achievements. They were asking me to come back because they didn't believe Ethan could handle it on his own. It was as if my success didn't matter unless it was used to fix their mistakes. I had built the summit from the ground up, and now they were trying to pull me back into a place that had never fully appreciated what I could do. The calls kept coming. The texts piled up. And the guilt? It gnawed at me. I knew my parents needed me. I knew they were struggling with Mountain Pine Lodge, and in a way I sympathized. But the more they asked, the more I realized that they had never truly seen me as a leader. They had never fully acknowledged the sacrifices I made to save the family business in the first place. And they weren't seeing me now. One evening I finally couldn't take it anymore. My parents had asked me to come over for dinner, and I knew what was coming. As I walked into their house, the tension was palpable. The familiar smell of Mom's cooking filled the air, but I couldn't ignore the heaviness in the room. I sat down at the table, and before I could even say a word, my father spoke. "Charlie," he began, his voice softer than usual, "we've been thinking a lot about everything. You've done great things with the summit, but we really need you. Ethan isn't working out. The hotel is falling apart, and we're running out of options. Please come back and help us." I could feel the old frustration welling up inside me, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Dad," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I've already told you. I can't come back. I've moved on." "But Mountain Pine Lodge is family," my mother interjected, her tone pleading. "You can't just leave it to Ethan. He's making terrible decisions, and we need you to guide him." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. I had already tried to help. I had poured my heart into that hotel, only to be dismissed by both Ethan and my parents. I had worked tirelessly to save it, only to have my efforts disregarded. And now, when the situation was dire, they wanted me to clean up their mess? They wanted me to step back into the role I had outgrown, to fix what they had allowed to crumble? "No," I said quietly, but with resolve. "I won't do it. You had your chance to trust me, but you didn't. You didn't believe in my ability to lead then, and now you want me to fix everything after Ethan ruined it." My father looked taken aback, but I could see the regret in his eyes. My mother's face fell, and I could almost hear the disappointment in her silence. I didn't care. I had spent my whole life chasing their approval, bending over backward to be the perfect daughter, the perfect businesswoman. But now I was finally living my own life. It was time for them to accept that. "I'm not going back," I repeated. "I've built the summit because I believe in myself. I believe in what I can do. And I'm not going to let you undermine that by asking me to come back and fix what's broken at Mountain Pine Lodge. That's Ethan's responsibility now." There was a long, painful silence. My mother opened her mouth as if to say something, but I cut her off. "You never trusted me when I was there. And now that I've succeeded on my own, you still don't see me for who I am. I can't keep living in your shadow." My father looked down at his hands, his face drawn with frustration. "I'm sorry, Charlie," he said quietly. I just thought you'd come back. I never realized how much we were asking of you." I nodded, my chest heavy with the weight of the moment. "I've done everything I can for this family. Now it's time for me to do something for myself." As I stood up and left their house, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. The decision had been made. I wasn't going back. And I didn't need their approval anymore. It was time to focus on what mattered. The summit, my future, and the life I had built for myself. No more living in their shadow. The phone call came as I was reviewing the new social media campaign for the summit. It was from Lucas, one of my suppliers, someone I had worked with for years. He sounded more nervous than usual, which immediately put me on edge. "Charlie, I need to talk to you about something," he said, his voice low. "I don't know how to tell you this, but you should be aware that there's a competitor out there who's suddenly offering discounts on products we've been providing for the summit. They're pushing deals that we never agreed to." I furrowed my brows, my heart rate picking up. "Who's doing this? Are you sure it's not just a coincidence?" He hesitated. "I don't want to say this, but it's Mountain Pine Lodge. They've been buying up the same products at half the price we've been selling to you. And I've heard rumors that they're offering exclusive deals to a few of our partners." The words felt like a punch to the gut. Mountain Pine Lodge? My family's hotel? Ethan had barely been able to keep things afloat, and now he was using underhanded tactics to try and undercut me? "Are you sure about this, Lucas?" I demanded, feeling my blood pressure rise. "Because if you're wrong about this, it could ruin my relationships with our suppliers. I've worked hard to build trust with you all. I'm telling you the truth, Charlie. You have to be careful. They're trying to sabotage you," he said before quickly ending the call. The words echoed in my mind as I sat there, stunned. Ethan, my own brother, was working behind my back. He wasn't just sitting in the CEO chair at Mountain Pine Lodge. He was actively collaborating with competitors, feeding them information to harm the summit. How could he do this to me? After everything I had done to save that hotel, he was trying to destroy everything I had worked so hard for. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had noticed the sudden spike in discount offers in the market. New businesses were popping up with services that mirrored ours exactly, down to the special packages that we had created. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, that perhaps other hotels were just learning from our success. But now, after talking to Lucas, I realized that Ethan had been leaking our information to the competition. He had been undermining me from the inside. The betrayal was sharp. I had always believed that, despite everything, family was supposed to come first. That we could count on each other, even when the world around us crumbled. But Ethan had shattered that belief. He had chosen to tear me down for his own gain, for the sake of his own vision of the hotel. It wasn't about family anymore. It was about winning no matter the cost. I spent the next few days working quietly, keeping my focus on the summit, and trying to process the weight of what I had just learned. But the more I watched Mountain Pine Lodge's rise in the rankings, the more I felt the sting of betrayal. They were using the exact same strategies I had implemented at the summit, the ones I had spent months fine-tuning. They were clearly taking advantage of my ideas, and with the insider information Ethan had shared, they had a massive head start. It wasn't just the hotel industry where Ethan had crossed the line. It was personal now. I had been fighting to protect the family legacy, to preserve something that meant so much to us all. But Ethan? He was willing to destroy it all for his own ambition. I had to do something. I wasn't going to let him destroy my hotel and my hard-earned reputation. But what could I do? Ethan had already done the damage. Now it was my turn to take action, and I couldn't do it alone. The first step was to reach out to Lucas again. I needed to know everything. I needed solid proof of Ethan's betrayal. Lucas agreed to meet me the next day, and we went over everything: the conversations, the deals, the discounted rates Mountain Pine Lodge had been striking with our suppliers. It was all there in black and white. Ethan had been actively working against me, and now I had the evidence I needed to fight back. But it wasn't just about protecting the summit anymore. It was about sending a message to Ethan. A message that no one could destroy everything I had worked for and get away with it. I was done being a passive player in my own story. The next day, I called a meeting with my team at the summit. I told them everything that had been happening, the secrets Ethan had been hiding, and how it had affected us. The loyalty in their eyes warmed me. They were with me every step of the way. I wasn't in this fight alone anymore. Together, we could protect the summit and show Ethan that he couldn't win by cheating. I took to social media too. Publicly, I didn't call out my brother or name Mountain Pine Lodge. But I did make sure to highlight how the summit was built on transparency, hard work, and integrity. We were committed to our customers and our suppliers.
No shortcuts, no underhanded tactics.
The message was clear. I wasn't backing down. And I wouldn't let my family's legacy be corrupted by someone who only cared about himself. That night, I finally confronted Ethan. It had to be done. I couldn't let him get away with what he had done, and I couldn't let him continue to poison the family business. I called him into my office at the summit. When he walked in, there was no friendly greeting, no warm smile like we used to share. Only the tension in the room was palpable. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Ethan," I said, my voice low but firm. "I know everything. I know you've been feeding information to our competitors. And I won't stand for it anymore." His face paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "You've hurt me more than anyone ever could. But what you don't understand is that I'm not going to let you destroy everything I've worked for. The summit is mine now. And you're not going to take that away from me." Ethan's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked like the person who had lost control, the one who had been caught. He had no answer. The fight had gone out of him. "I don't know why you're doing this," I continued, my voice shaking with emotion. "But I do know one thing. I'm not going to let you ruin everything I've built. And if that means taking you down, so be it." I turned away, no longer interested in hearing his excuses. He was no longer the brother I'd once tried to protect. And now the battle to protect the summit, my success, was just beginning. Months had passed since I confronted Ethan. In that time, the summit had continued to flourish, but with each day, the weight of the betrayal from my family felt heavier. The hotel was thriving. We were receiving rave reviews, and our reputation as a top destination was spreading far and wide. But no matter how much success the summit achieved, there was always that lingering sense of unfinished business. A piece of my past that I could never quite escape. The tipping point came when we were nominated for an award that frankly I didn't expect. The summit had been named the best boutique hotel in the region by the Colorado Luxury Hotel Awards. I couldn't believe it when I got the call. The competition was fierce, with some of the most luxurious and well-established hotels in the area. To be recognized in such a way was an incredible achievement, one that validated everything I had worked for over the past months. I remember the night of the awards ceremony like it was yesterday. The grand ballroom was filled with industry leaders, journalists, and hotel owners from all over the state. I stood there in my gown, feeling the electricity in the air, a buzz that seemed to hum with excitement. I could hardly believe I was part of this world now, the world I had worked so hard to enter. But even as I stood among my peers, the thought of my family weighed on my mind. As the night wore on, the ceremony progressed in typical fashion. Awards were given out, toasts were made, and handshakes were exchanged. But when the time came to announce the winner for Best Boutique Hotel, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This was the moment. This was the recognition that I had been waiting for, the one I had worked so hard to earn. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said, "the winner of the 2025 Colorado Luxury Hotel Award for Best Boutique Hotel is..." They paused for dramatic effect. The summit. A burst of applause filled the room as I stood there, stunned. I could hardly believe it. I had won. We had won. It was the culmination of years of work, of sleepless nights, of battling for something that felt like it had been denied to me for so long. I walked up to the stage, my legs feeling like jelly. The award was handed to me with a smile, and as I looked out into the crowd, I saw familiar faces, my team, the loyal staff who had helped me turn this dream into reality. Their cheers were deafening, and in that moment, I realized just how far we had come. But there was one thing that caught my eye as I stood there on the stage: my parents. They were seated toward the back of the room, quietly watching. I didn't expect them to be there, not after everything that had happened, but there they were. Their eyes were fixed on me. My mother, who had always been the one to push me toward success, was sitting still, her hands folded in her lap. She looked proud, but there was a certain sadness in her gaze, a recognition of something I had already known. My father was beside her, his usual stoic expression giving way to something softer, though still reserved. I gave my acceptance speech, thanking my team, our guests, and everyone who had believed in the summit. As I spoke, I made sure to include a subtle nod to Mountain Pine Lodge, not in an angry or bitter way, but as a reminder of where I had started and how far I had come. It was here, I said. At the place where I first fell in love with hospitality, where I learned what it means to take care of people. The summit is a dream realized not just for me, but for all of us who have worked together to make it a reality. As I finished my speech, the applause from the room was overwhelming. But in the back of my mind, I kept returning to the look on my parents' faces. They hadn't clapped as loudly as the others. They hadn't jumped to their feet. But in their silence, in the way their eyes followed me as I made my way off the stage, I understood something. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a grand declaration of support. But it was something more subtle. It was acknowledgement. Later that evening, I found my parents standing off to the side, away from the crowd. They were talking to a few people, but I could see their eyes scanning the room, searching for me. When they saw me approaching, they excused themselves and walked toward me. My heart skipped a beat as I saw them standing there in front of me for the first time in a long time. I wanted to say congratulations, Charlie, my father said, his voice gruff but sincere. You've done something incredible. The summit. It's everything we hoped it could be. I wasn't sure what to say. Part of me wanted to burst out with all the emotions I had been holding in for so long. How their lack of belief in me had hurt, how I had been pushed aside, and how this success was my victory, not theirs. But instead I simply nodded, allowing myself to feel the weight of the moment. My mother, standing beside my father, gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile. She reached out and touched my arm, a silent gesture of pride. But that was it. There were no grand apologies, no acknowledgement of the years of frustration, no deep conversation. Just their presence, and the quiet understanding that lingered between us. For a moment it was enough. We're proud of you, my mother finally said, her voice soft, but her eyes telling me more than words ever could. And in that moment I knew. The recognition I had craved, the acknowledgement I had been waiting for, wasn't about a grand apology or a change in my parents' behavior. It was about me standing here on my own terms, having built something from scratch. The success of the summit wasn't just a reflection of my hard work. It was a testament to my resilience. It was proof that I didn't need to rely on anyone's approval, not even my family's. As I stood there with my parents, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I had hoped for. But it was something. And for the first time I realized that I had everything I needed. The summit was my victory, and nothing could take that away from me. The days following the awards ceremony felt like a dream. For the first time in years I was content with my life. The summit was thriving, my team was loyal, and the future seemed bright. It was as if everything I had worked for had finally fallen into place. Yet, deep down, I knew that there was one lingering thing I had yet to confront, the question of my family. Though I had distanced myself from Mountain Pine Lodge and had fully committed to building my own success with the summit, my family still lingered in the back of my mind. I had spent years of my life working to preserve what I thought was our family's legacy. Every decision, every sacrifice I made had been in the name of protecting Mountain Pine Lodge. I thought I was safeguarding a piece of history, something that belonged to us and only us. But one evening everything changed. I was going through some old documents in my office at the summit, sorting through records and contracts that had been piling up. I had been meaning to organize everything, but life had always gotten in the way. That night, though, I had the time to dive in. As I flipped through old papers, one file caught my eye. It was an old deed to Mountain Pine Lodge. I hadn't seen it in years, and curiosity got the better of me. I opened the folder, expecting to find the usual agreements and updates. Instead, I found something that would change everything. There, in black and white, was a clause that I had never seen before. It was dated long before I had ever set foot in the hotel, and it detailed the original purchase of Mountain Pine Lodge by my grandparents. I had always assumed that the hotel was a family creation, something passed down through generations. But this document told a different story. According to it, Mountain Pine Lodge wasn't built by my grandparents. It had been bought as an investment, purchased from a major developer. My grandparents had made the purchase decades ago, as part of a larger real estate deal. The truth hit me like a freight train. Everything I had been told about the hotel being a family legacy was a lie. It wasn't a gift passed down through generations. It was an asset, a piece of a strategic investment portfolio. This wasn't the cherished family heirloom I had believed it to be. It was a financial move, one that had been disguised as a family treasure for decades. My parents had kept this from me. They had built a story, a myth around Mountain Pine Lodge, and I had bought into it all these years. The shock of it was almost too much to bear. I stared at the deed for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. Everything I had worked for, the late nights, the sacrifices, the way I had fought to protect this place, suddenly felt hollow. I hadn't been protecting a family legacy. I had been protecting a real estate asset. My parents had been playing me, manipulating the narrative to make me believe I was preserving something sacred. In truth, I had been doing their bidding all along. I couldn't fathom why they had kept this from me. Why had they let me believe that Mountain Pine Lodge was a family treasure, something passed down from generation to generation, when in reality, it was just another investment in their portfolio? Why had they made me fight for something that wasn't even what I thought it was? As the realization sank in, I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. The hotel, the one I had spent so much of my life protecting, was just another business deal. I wasn't protecting a piece of history. I had been a pawn in my parents' strategy all along. I felt foolish. All those years of loyalty, all those sacrifices for a legacy that wasn't even mine. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I had to know the truth. So the next time I saw my parents, I confronted them. It wasn't easy. The words came out in a rush, and I could feel the weight of the betrayal in my voice. "You lied to me," I said, staring at them across the dinner table. "All these years you've made me believe that Mountain Pine Lodge was a family legacy. But it wasn't. It was an investment. You bought it. It wasn't passed down to you. It wasn't something you built. It was just another asset in your portfolio." My father looked at me, his face pale. My mother's eyes shifted uncomfortably. It was clear that they weren't prepared for this confrontation. My father opened his mouth, but no words came out. He seemed to be searching for an explanation, but there was none. "We thought it would be better this way," my mother finally said, her voice shaky. "We didn't want to burden you with the truth. We wanted you to see it as something important, something worth fighting for. We thought if you believed in it, you would work harder to save it." "Save it?" I shot back, my anger rising. "I didn't save a family treasure, Mom. I saved an investment. I've worked my whole life thinking I was preserving something that meant something to us. But it was just a business deal to you. All of it. I was just another pawn in your plan." My father finally spoke, his voice low. "We didn't mean for it to happen this way, Charlie. We never wanted you to feel like you were used. We thought it was better to let you believe in the legacy." "Well, I don't anymore," I said, standing up. "Because it wasn't a legacy. It was a lie. And now I don't know what to believe in anymore. I don't know if I've ever been protecting the right thing." I turned and walked out of the room, my heart heavy with the weight of everything I had just learned. The truth had shattered the foundation of everything I had believed in. The legacy I had fought for wasn't even real. The hotel, the family's supposed treasure, had been nothing more than a financial asset in my parents' eyes. As I stood outside looking at the night sky, I felt lost. What had all my efforts been for? Had I been chasing something that didn't even exist? I couldn't ignore the sense of betrayal I felt, but I also realized something. The truth had freed me. I wasn't protecting a family treasure. I was building my own future. And the summit was the legacy I was creating, not the one I had been told to protect. The past didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was the future I was building for myself. In the weeks that followed the discovery of my family's hidden truth, I found myself standing at a crossroads, staring down a path that was both terrifying and liberating. The weight of betrayal still lingered, but I knew I had to move forward. I had built the summit from nothing, and now it wasn't just a hotel. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for. But more than that, it was mine. It was my success, my vision, my future. The realization hit me slowly, like a distant thunderstorm rolling in. I didn't need my family's validation anymore. I didn't need their approval or their approval of what I had built. For years, I had been chasing a version of success that I thought would earn their respect. But now I understood something profoundly different. Success wasn't about winning their approval. It wasn't about what they thought of me or the hotel. Success was about building something that I could be proud of on my own terms. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I spent the next few months fully immersed in the summit, but not in the same way I had before. The obsession with perfection and the need to prove myself had faded. Instead, I focused on creating a community. My team was more than just staff, they were my partners. They believed in the summit just as much as I did, and together we had built something that was bigger than any individual effort. Our guests weren't just customers. They were a part of our journey. They were the reason we had succeeded, and it was their stories that kept the summit alive. I worked hard to foster a sense of belonging at the summit, something I had never felt in my own family. We held regular staff meetings, not just to discuss business but to share our successes and struggles. I made sure to listen to their ideas, their feedback, and their concerns. It wasn't just about getting the job done. It was about creating a space where everyone felt valued. It was about building a community, a family of our own, where everyone's voice mattered. But as much as the summit grew, I knew that my personal growth was just as important. The bonds I had with my employees, the relationships I was building with the guests, and the new friends I was making were all part of something that went far beyond business. I had spent so many years focused on my career, convinced that success meant sacrificing everything else. But now, I saw that success wasn't just about the accolades or the financial achievements. It was about the connections we made, the people we met, and the lives we touched. I reached out to old friends I had lost touch with over the years. It wasn't easy at first. There was always this nagging feeling that I had neglected them in pursuit of something I thought was more important. But slowly I began to rebuild those relationships. I reconnected with people who had known me before all of this. The girl who had once dreamed of opening a small cozy hotel with no grand ambitions. They reminded me of who I was before I got caught up in trying to be someone I wasn't. And with them, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before. The more I spent time with my old friends, the more I realized just how much I had changed. The girl who had once been driven solely by ambition was now someone who valued the simple things. Laughter, connection, and moments of stillness. I wasn't just building a business, I was building a life. And for the first time in my life, that life didn't depend on anyone else's approval. But it wasn't just my personal relationships that had changed, it was the way I saw success. I had always been obsessed with proving myself, with showing my family and the world that I could succeed. But now, I understood that success wasn't about competing with others or trying to outrun the past. It was about defining success for myself on my own terms. I woke up each day with a sense of purpose. The work at the summit was still demanding, but it no longer consumed me in the way it had before. I found balance. I had time for myself, for the people I cared about, and for the things I loved. I started hiking the trails around the mountains near the hotel, taking long walks to clear my mind. I started reading again, something I hadn't done in years. I had rediscovered my love for writing, jotting down thoughts and ideas that had once felt too far out of reach. For the first time in years, I felt whole. One day, as I stood at the top of a mountain trail, overlooking the breathtaking view of the valley below, I realized that I had found something more important than success. I had found peace. I had found a sense of freedom that I had never known before. It wasn't freedom from the past because that would always be a part of me, but it was freedom from the pressure to meet someone else's expectations. It was the freedom to be myself. I looked at the summit, my hotel, my creation. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges ahead, of course, but it was mine and that was enough. For the first time in my life, I could finally breathe. I didn't need my family's approval, and I didn't need to prove anything to anyone else. Success had never been about building a hotel or gaining recognition. It had always been about finding my own voice, my own path. And in that moment, I realized that I had done just that. I had built a life for myself, one that was true to who I was. I had created my own legacy, and this time it was one I could be proud of.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for updates on new videos. See you next time.